Welcome. Love is in the air, and today we're talking about the ongoing romance between leftist intellectuals, academics, professors, and militant Islam in the form of Hamas and Hezbollah. Begin by talking about Judith Butler, professor of gender studies at UC Berkeley for 30 some odd years. She is truly a grand dame among comprachicos and a spiritual godmother to today's campus protesters. Let's go back to a little clip from UC Berkeley back in 2006. In the context of a panel discussion, Judith Butler made comments to the effect that Hezbollah is a progressive movement. It's a leftist movement, which is to be considered part of the global left. Let me just pause for a moment to let you absorb that. Now, more recently, Judith Butler made some controversial comments about Hamas and about the October 7th attacks, where she began by saying, well, first of all, we have to agree that we're going to call October 7th armed resistance. Right? That's our starting point. We all have to agree that we're going to call it armed resistance, and then we can have a conversation about whether it was an effective form of armed resistance. Now, think about this. A professor of gender studies is saying we can have a polite discussion about whether the rape and mutilation of civilian women, torture, murder, whether that's, it's open to discussion whether that's an acceptable form of armed resistance. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but maybe it is. What do we make of all this? James Valiant, welcome. What do you have to say?
Well, it is a bizarre paradox that the left should in any way be taking the side of groups like Hezbollah or Hamas. They are the most illiberal forces in the world today, just as their backer, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is one of the most atavistic, savage, medieval places on this planet, where women, just for wearing the hijab slightly wrong, disappear in prison. They get tortured and killed. And when women rise up, like they did a couple of years ago, hundreds of them are hanged in public, women and girls, where homosexuals get hung by cranes, by chain, or by rope. And Iranians, as I've said before, don't do the break the neck quick hanging. It's that slow strangulation kind of hanging. So if you're a woman who wants slightly more rights, if you're a homosexual, or if you're part of this an uprising, as people have for the last 15 years been rising up in Iran, it's strange to me because it's not just the more liberal Western groups that Iran suppresses, it's communist groups, leftist groups. They suppress the left. And yet the left has nothing but praise for both Iran and their absolutely echo little proxy, Hezbollah. So it is absolutely astonishing to me. Now, for Professor Butler to be framing it in this way, what she's saying is Israel is inherently illegitimate. The point that we so often make is Israel is the only really legitimate government in the region because they respect individual rights. Women,
Right, including
gays,
equal rights of women and men,
that's
and
exactly it. You can you
homosexuals are
can be
not
a
persecuted.
Muslim, you can be a Christian, and go to your regular religious services without fear in Israel. Women and gays actually have right. There are gay bars in Tel Aviv. Women actually can wear bikinis on the beach. Women and gays actually have rights. That's what makes Israel legitimate. And yet she's saying, in all of her liberal academic, with all of her liberal academic authority, no, no, Israel is the illiberal place, and it's Hezbollah and Hamas who are resistance movements. And so, if we think that, okay, maybe October 7th, the tactics went a little too far, that's exactly what she's saying. We can argue the tactics, but what we can't argue is that Israel is illegitimate and evil, and that these atavistic, savage Islamist groups are somehow the defenders of liberty and liberalism and the progressive left. She's recruiting the most illiberal ideology on the planet into the academic left in the Western world. Uh, Now, is that paradoxical? Is that perverse? That's absurd on the face of it to anyone who has anything like a genuine liberal value. It's bizarre.
As Ayn Rand would say, it's a paradox, but not a contradiction. So,
Exactly right. And the
yeah,
paradox is, as always, the contradiction is in the confused head of,
yeah.
and usually the intellectual. The fact that she's got a PhD and is a famous feminist, she's one of the most famous feminist intellectuals in America. When
Mm.
I when I was a younger for the last 30, 40 years, she's been a very important voice in academia in America. And here she is saying the first premise going in the door, Israel's illegitimate. The people who were resisting them on October 7th, it's just a resistance movement, even if we argue about the tactical details.
Now,
Wow.
getting to this point of contradiction versus paradox, some people in our audience might perhaps be familiar with some of the work on postmodernism by Dr. Stephen Hicks. He makes a very provocative point in his book explaining postmodern. He says that the failure of epistemology made postmodernism possible. And by the failure of epistemology, he means Kant's Copernican revolution, where the relationship between subject and object is reversed. But then he also said the failure of socialism made postmodernism necessary. Meaning that if we put ourselves back in the 50s and 60s, everywhere you could in the world, you saw the triumph of capitalism, the sheer failure and brutality of socialist and communist regimes. And the intellectuals at the time, I guess the old left and the old new left, faced with this idea where they had to either choose socialism or choose reason and logic and facts and evidence, said, to hell with reason and logic, to hell with facts and evidence. We're going to keep socialism no matter what. So the new left, faced on the one hand with Israel, the only country in the entire region that supports women's rights, gay rights, equal rights for all citizens, and contrasting that with the leftist intellectuals' hatred of the West, their hatred of civilization, their hatred of the Enlightenment, they're making their choice.
You made
That
it
because
outstanding.
Israel is part of the West, we have to reject Israel. We have to reject, the whole Western patriarchy or whatever nonsense, and statism at all costs.
Boy, do you make a great point there, Nicholas. Oh my gosh, my friend. Um, uh, the truth is, socialism and Marxism in particular had a crisis in the 20th century. Its failure had become obvious. It had promised to deliver the goods, to be this great technological and economic success. And when it turned out to be a giant bust, the postmodernists kind of chucked all grand ideologies in the process, although they kept their left wing politics. And they basically had a choice, as you said. Do we stick to our noble ideals that we once had, or do we just stick with the idea that we want power? They chose power. They chose power. By the way, this, as Ayn Rand observed, you can see it in environmentalism, progress versus power. They chose power over progress with the Greens too. But here, you see, when Hezbollah first came into existence in the late 70s and early 80s, it was thought of as a resistance against the awful illegal invasion of Israel of southern Lebanon. That fit their classic Marxist model of, Western colonialism and imperialism is the problem. Hezbollah is just a resistance movement. I think it's far less tenable today. 40 years on, people see that Hezbollah is really just the foreign policy arm of the Islamic Republic of Iran. People are far less enamored. I mean, there was still a guilt complex that the West had over accepting the Shah. America had really supported the Shah. Other Western countries were turning a blind eye to the Shah. The Shah was not a Boy Scout, not a good guy. But the point is, a lot worse took over with the Islamic Republic. And I think 40 years on now, and the good sign is that this feminist professor from Berkeley had to decline an invitation to attend an international conference because of the controversy of her statements. I don't think you'd have seen that 40 years ago. I think more people, a much wider group of people, I think our intellectuals are still the worst of them. In the West, I think our intellectuals still are believing a lot of this nonsense, but at least she was facing the pressure that she couldn't speak at a big international conference precisely because these very comments that we're talking about got her into hot water.
Yeah. Now, one point that I want to make, a refrain that we often hear is that the West has lost its moral compass. And what we really, and this is something you hear from Jordan Peterson and from a lot of people on the right, is that in order for the West to regain its moral compass, what we need is Christianity. Christianity is what's going to defend us from Islamism. Christianity is going to defend us from the woke. Just in the reality show the other day, we talked about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who converted to Christianity precisely for this reason. But consider this. Our whole disastrous foreign policy, including Israel, in the West, has been determined by this sort of turn the other cheek, love thy enemy, Judeo-Christian morality. It's the Judeo-Christian morality which has delivered the West into the hands of the Islamists and the wokists and the environmentalists and the BLMists. It's just giving the West more of the poison that has intellectually disarmed it and is destroying it.
Very beautifully stated. Very beautifully stated. There's absolutely no question that it's the shared morality on the right and the left. Whatever it is, when the right-wing conservatives will be arguing, hey, we're the ones for capitalism, and we shouldn't have socialism. We shouldn't have such a large welfare state. And some of your out-of-context pacifist arguments, Mr. Leftist, really hurt the West. They're completely disarmed by Christianity. Christianity advocates this altruist morality, and the left gets the upper hand, the moral high ground, if you will, on issues of this kind. Hey, no, we're helping the poor. We're the ones turning the other cheek and being pacifist, even it is the most horrible aggression abroad. First communist aggression, and now Islamist aggression. And we turn the other cheek. See, we're better Christians. It's so funny to see American politicians. Unfortunately, America, sort of backwards in one respect among Western nations, we're still a very Christian country. And so the argument on Capitol Hill in D.C. is often, who owns Jesus? Does the left own Jesus or does the right own Jesus? And so long as they're making an argument like that, we are screwed. Excuse my language, because no effective response can happen. No, in the wake of 9/11, where did George Bush, the president at the time, go? He went to a mosque and declared religious solidarity. This has nothing to do with Islam, even culturally on the fringes. No, the entire Islamic world is A-OK by him. And it was sort of a feeling of religious solidarity. In the wake of 9/11, people like me were writing articles, and people more famous than me were even writing articles. The enemy here is primitive mysticism. Can't you see? Suicide bombers inherently wouldn't be doing this if they weren't motivated by their religion. No. We couldn't have that. And if you can't have that from the president of the United States in the wake of September 11th, 2001, you are doomed ideologically. And history pans that out. So it was the more secular ruler, Saddam Hussein, that he goes after, you see, rather than Iran, rather than really address Saudi Arabia, where a lot of the ideology behind 9/11 had come from. Rather than take on Islam as a cultural force, he said, no. Islam is a religion of peace, and all the other BS we've heard from Western leaders since. And what did that produce? It produced more violence. It produced intifadas and rocket launches and Iranian terrorism, and culminating, of course, most recently with the hideous atrocities, the hideous mutilation, raping people to death, atrocities of October 7th.
Would it be fair to say that Judaism and Christianity, as philosophical systems, as systems of ideas, are in a way as guilty as Islam for producing the tragedies of September 11th, October 7th, to the extent that they have intellectually disarmed the West and made us, again, turn the other cheek, love our enemies, and allow these monsters, these Hamas and Hezbollah, to proliferate and to continue going on rather than wiping them out many years ago or decades ago.
It does create, religion as such creates a kind of moral intrinsicism where killing is bad. Even killing in rational self-defense is bad. Oh, we can't kill, the civilians, even if Hamas puts their stuff in hospitals and schools, even when their soldiers don't wear uniforms, even when they hold their babies up in front of them, they'll shoot at you while holding their own baby right in front of them. They want their own civilians dead for PR purposes because they understand this religious altruist morality. No, no. The killing of bad people is a good thing, and religion can't really get their head around that. And they have been to some. Now, Christianity and Judaism did undergo an enlightenment. What happened in the 17th and 18th century among European Christians and Jews has not happened in the Islamic world. And so the previous religious attitudes have been softened. On the other hand, the sanctioning of the more savage mysticism, the letting them get away with it, though, geez, if we don't bomb the mosques, if we don't bomb the schools, if we're nice to them, if we send them aid, if we feed their children, educate their girls, somehow they'll like us. No, that's not going to work. That kind of appeasement only encourages them, and they see that as decadent weakness. And so I think it's a hard lesson for these religious people to learn, precisely because they approach morality in the wrong way. So I wouldn't blame Christians for the atrocities themselves, but I would say that without whether they know it or not, their moral sanction, which comes from their lingering religious attitudes, enables it. And they had better recognize that those religious attitudes are enabling the most evil, primitive forces on this planet.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And now there's an interesting phenomenon there. There are certain professors, academics who identify as atheist or secularist or whatever, who nonetheless don't want to criticize Hamas or Hezbollah. So we had the example, there was the clip, which perhaps we can put in the description, of Christopher Hitchens from some years ago, or maybe it was a couple of decades ago, where he's actually standing up for Hezbollah's resistance to Israel. So what do we make? And I think it's easy to misunderstand this phenomenon and assume, well, if somebody is a secularist, that means they're totally separate from religion. But I think many of these people on the left they essentially have a mystical worldview. Even though they claim to reject religion, they claim to reject some aspects of Christianity. They're, as Ayn Rand observed, the Soviet Union was the most mystical political system on earth. And these leftist professors like Hitchens and Butler, they still are essentially mystics and irrationalists. So they're not really all that different from their more explicitly religious comrades in the way they view these issues.
Another outstanding point, Nicholas. The Marxism is a religion. They're totally, what did Leon Trotsky, let's quote Trotsky himself: God is the state is God. And by that, you don't need an answer key to look at the back of the book for this. He's telling you right up front that you treat the state and the collective like God, and that's our religion, in effect. Marx believed in polylogism. He can be an atheist all he could assert, but of course, with this polylogism, none of your bourgeois logic, any of your scientific economics or political theory or Lockean rights or none of that's relevant. I've got my proletarian logic, and he overtly advocated, of course, a dictatorship. So these people are mystics. They're classic faith-enforced mystics, Marxists are. There's no question about it. And Chris Hitchens never overcame he changed through the course of his life, like many 20th century Marxists did, but he never really lost the essence of the Christian worldview. His brother is a Christian conservative, of course, but he never really lost that ethics. He was an altruist. He attacked Ayn Rand, you should know, explicitly in the course of his career for her egoism. He appreciated her as an atheist. He appreciated her as an independent voice. But hey, this is crazy. The world doesn't need more selfishness. No, the world needs more selfishness. Chris, you are still buying the ethics of Jesus. You can say God isn't great in your books. You can say religion is an enemy in your books. You can even, and the wonderful book he did on Mother Teresa, I followed Hitchens' work when he was alive. But still, he stuck to the very end. He still bought in to the Christian ethics that the left has never questioned, And they have no rational way of answering ethics. The academics have long since bought into Hume's premise, you can't get an is from an ought. Without Ayn Rand's ethics, the left is never going to have an answer here. They're going to be mired in the same medieval Christian altruism. And so this paradox that we started out with, the most illiberal regimes and organizations in the world are embraced as the embodiments of leftist progressivism today, as Professor Butler describes it. Yeah, I would hope though today Chris did change. Hitch over time changed, and I would like to believe that today he wouldn't be so naive. He'd recognize that these are atavistic forces. But back in those days, he was still believing that it was an illegal invasion of Lebanon by Israel, even though there was like the Haifa attack and all these attacks coming from Lebanon. Since the UN said it was illegal, it was illegal. And so Ariel Sharon was a war criminal, et cetera, et cetera. I think his position I hope his position today would have been no, Hezbollah is just the arm of the evil Iranian regime. I would hope.
Well said. And for those among our viewers who are interested in exploring some of these questions in more detail, I'd like to put in a plug for the upcoming Ayn Rand University course by our colleague Nikos Sotirakopoulos on Marxism and communism. Imagine learning that subject from a real master of this particular field and discipline. Now, let's just pause for a moment. And Morgan, can you please read out, are there any comments or super chats from our viewers at the moment?
Sure. So we have $1 from Bonnie, thank you very much, and $7 from Kirsten. And then we have £5 from PC, who said Hitler was a socialist, my mum said. I don't know if you guys have any comment on that, but that's what we have.
Mum was right. As usual, Mum was right. The name of the party is the Nationalist Socialist. I mean, it's right there in the name. And from the very beginning in the early 1920s, Hitler and his cronies said this is a worker socialist movement. The difference with Bolshevik Marxism is that they were internationalist. They were concerned about the worldwide working class and the worldwide bourgeoisie. Hitler was a racist nationalist. That's the only difference. But it's just different flavors of collectivism and just different flavors of socialism.
Yeah. So in other words, the focus with the Nazis was more on race and nationalism rather than on economic classes, as was the case with the Marxists.
Exactly. Now, who do you hate? The rich bourgeoisie and the Jews, like Marx did, or do you hate the Jews and the Gypsies because they're enemies of the Deutsche Volke? You know, that was really the choice. Really, not much of a choice from any real liberal perspective, huh?
And since we're talking today about leftist academics, I want to mention an interesting statistic that I came across a few weeks ago. Apparently, there was a poll here among Canadians of how many people support the ongoing campus protest. And I was somewhat pleased to see that more than 50% of Canadians are opposed to the campus protest. And the percentage in favor, which is, I think it was somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, which is still way too high. It should be zero, but nonetheless, it shows that there's a real lack of connection between the average productive, educated working person and the monsters in our universities and colleges. So what do we make of that? Why is there such a gap here in North America? And I'm not sure exactly what the situation is like in Europe. Probably in Europe, the gap is a little, because Europe has always been a little more collectivized. But here in North America, there's such a huge gap between the intellectuals and the average sensible citizens. How do we understand this?
Well, that is a point that Ayn Rand long observed. That one of the great things about the United States is that unlike European nations, there is this gap between the cultural elites and the ordinary person. And I think I'm pleased to see that this is also true. I mean, you wonder why we get the political leaders we do in North America, but typically, as is the case, North America, and I think it has something to do with the founding ideology of the United States. I also think it has something to do with being pioneers in the West. It lends itself to being individualistic, we can do it on our own, and we kind of didn't trust these foreign ideas coming in that they sort of almost felt instinctively were against the individualism that it actually took to tame the West in North America. There's sort of a conflict between the founding ideas of people who want to civilize an uncivilized wilderness in North America, and they come there with the ideas of individualism and the idea of Lockean rights. They're going to have a different view of this new Hegelian Marxist ideology that is only pumped out from the universities in North America. So I'm pleased to see that North Americans are still a little better than Europeans in this regard. In fact, there's a distrust of intellectual elites, I think, that is growing in North America. I think more and more and more people in our continent, Nicholas, that are outright distrusting universities. And these campus protests have done no favor to the public perception of universities. What the hell's going on at the universities? The universities are out of step from the way most North Americans, even educated North Americans, believe. And so there's that wealthy donor just yesterday who announced he's giving $250 million to an Israeli university, not his alma mater, Columbia University. And the more that happens, the more you really begin to see this divide. Even educated, he went to Columbia University. He's a billionaire, but he's giving his millions not to his alma mater, the place where he got his degree, a tough university to get into in the first place. He's giving it to an Israeli university. That I hope continues, and I hope this division continues between the good people of North America and these intellectual elites. Yeah.
Well, one possible tragedy is that a lot of people who are not on the left, whether they're on the right or more moderate, will abandon the realm of ideas altogether and turn anti-intellectual. It's again something that Ayn Rand identified back in the 60s and 70s. And so, last question, what advice would you give? Imagine there's somebody watching this who's a young potential college university student or maybe a professor who doesn't understand what's going on. What advice would you give on how they can survive in this toxic academic environment?
One word, objectivism. One word, really. I would say read the works of Ayn Rand, start with her novels, read her view of rights, read her foundation for morality, read an epistemology that flies in the face of all this postmodernist irrationality and subjectivism. And you'll get the tools you need to properly understand what a defense of civilization requires. I recommend the work of Leonard Peikoff. I recommend read The Ominous Parallels, which I quoted from, for example. And as you've pointed out some other good intellectuals to read, I would say read the work of Yaron Brook, Ilan Giorno. They really understand this, and it takes a philosophical defense. We can only win this with moral and intellectual arguments. We can only win this by defending reason and individualism. And that, at the end of the day, that's the only solution, Nicholas. So what we're saying here is a unique voice. If you think this content is important, consider becoming a paid subscriber, paid member of Ayn Rand Center UK, because this is the answer, ladies and gentlemen. It's reason, individualism, and civilization alone that can defend the liberal order. And I'm afraid both the right and the left have no real answer to Hezbollah. They really don't. When a leading American intellectual like Professor Butler can say, yeah, let's incorporate Hezbollah and Hamas into the greater worldwide progressive left, you know something worse is happening.
Yeah. And if you want a real education, come to Ayn Rand University.
Definitely.
Any final comments or super chats, Morgan, from our viewers?
None so far.
Okay, or any announcements, upcoming shows, or anything for our members?
Well, we have the reality show going live in just a few minutes, and we'll have the reality show extra coming on tomorrow for channel members and ARC UK members. So everyone should sign up and join us tomorrow for the members only show.
Okay, well, then one last comment from me. I'd like to make an offer. This is an exclusive offer. I'm willing to pay for a one-way plane ticket for Judith Butler to go to any Islamist totalitarian state of her choice. One-way plane ticket. That's my offer.
You know,
Call me.
Yeah, I'm joining in with you. I will defray the expenses for that. This is a joint offer from Jim Valiant and Nicholas. So listen up out there, guys.
All right. Thanks for a great discussion, James.
Thank you as always, Nicholas.